And there you go. Excellent.
All right, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and get started here on this first workshop. I'm not sure what we're actually calling it. Action scenes, comment writing,
We're following the fight scenes workshop.
fight scene workshop. All right, so I'm going to break down basically how I write fight scenes, how I've helped a lot of authors, um, you know, either tighten up their fight scenes, make them better, or the authors who didn't really know what to do. They had an idea of where they wanted to go with the fight, but had no idea how to get through it. Um, so I went through and probably I don't know 30 authors or so that I went through and helped, and I actually wrote a little book on this, kind of a hand guide. I'm gonna eventually clean it up and publish it. But the way I break down fight scenes, it's kind of it's inside my brain, so it's always there. But when I first started writing, I wanted to make sure I was getting these right, and I set up a 12-step program to break down each fight to make sure that they are visceral, to make sure that they are keeping pace, they are important to the story. Because I was really surprised when I first started writing. I found out that a lot of readers will skip fight scenes, skip them completely. And a lot of times I asked them why they do that, and they said because they don't matter to the story. And that tells me that they are reading fight scenes that don't move the plot forward, that don't matter, or they're stagnant, or they're written in a way that the reader doesn't fully understand it. For the average reader, sometimes you gotta, explain things in a certain way to make sure they understand your choreography and everything else. But it also has to be tonally set to your world. You don't want to have a noble, bright world and then go into this fight scene that is just brutal and visceral and grim dark, and then hop back to it. And that's going to be really jarring. So you got to make sure that you fit them into a new world. So I'll go ahead and get started on this. I'm going to kind of read through my 12-step program here. I'll ad lib along the way, but so here's how we started. A building blows up. The main character gets in a scuffle. An all-out war covers the kingdom. An aerial fight jet, an aerial fighter jet chases another enemy away. A firefighter rushes into a burning house, where the mob speeds down the highway after the march. Each and every one of these scenes can become visceral. They can shape the pace and the stakes of the story. They can change the outcome of the story. But too much or too little in their action, pace, and story arc, they can fall flat. They can start to feel meaningless, and then they can diminish in intent. So, why is it that a lot of authors fear or dread writing action scenes, combat scenes? Um, it may seem like a fight or an action scene could be an intense moment of a story, but they can really easily become boring. Uh, and a lot of readers they'll just skip past it or they'll skim through it. And there's a lot of little important details you can lay in a fight scene, in a combat scene, or just an action scene in general. Um, and if your reader is missing that vital information in the story, well, then by the time they skip it and skim through it, now they got to go back. And now you've pulled your reader out of the story, which is what you don't want to do. You want to keep them immersed. You want to keep them on the edge of their seat, and you want to keep the story flowing. So there's a lot of different methods for building up action sequences. I'm not saying that mine is the best way to do it. There are other people out there. There's a lot of authors who, on their blogs, have set up incredible, in-depth um, breakdowns of how to do this a lot better than even I have. But in this little course here, I'll discuss the 12 steps that I've created to building better action scenes. Um, to go along with, I guess, my credentials, I was in martial arts from the age of 14. until I joined the military. And then I joined the Army at 18, turned 21 in Afghanistan. And even long before that, I was a huge nerd, huge comic book nerd, action movie nerd. And it kind of just built my foundation to have this mindset of really seeing fight scenes and battles laid out. And even then, as I started writing it, that doesn't necessarily mean just because they were at ease in my brain that I was able to write them well. I had to learn as well. There are a lot of authors who become known for writing these really unique and memorable fight scenes. There are these fight scenes that have been building. You're waiting for these action scenes, and that's what kind of what we're aiming for. Each one of the fight scenes we want the readers to enjoy, but we want them to remember it as well. We don't want them to skim past. We don't want them to miss things. So how do we create a scene that's not boring? How do we create fight scenes that are they're not repetitive? Um, and then how do you choreograph and maneuver characters in combat, even if you've never trained in martial arts, and you're not a veteran, you have no personal experience or training. So step one, I say, is erase the fight. So you read the parts of your story before and after the fight. And did anything change? Did anything change from before they stepped into the battle to after? And if it didn't, then the scene has not added to the story. It didn't move the plot along, and it can feel meaningless. And that means that your fight scene could and probably should be removed. It doesn't necessarily have to have physical residual evidence either. Um, the character, it can be something as simple as the characters learn something about themselves or their enemy. And then, of course, not all fight scenes are going to be all physical either. There are mental battles, there are verbal battles. But you want to look at before and after. So after the fight, does the character have any wounds or trauma? That's a lot of things that's always glossed over. You'll have this heightened period of adrenaline and shock or whatever, and then afterwards, you start to see the wounds. And a lot of authors, I think, too many of them skip over the wounds. Your character gets in this gruesome fight, and then afterwards, a couple chapters later, they're fine. And that's depending on your genre that you're writing. It is fiction, but if you set it in a style of realism, if you set it in a way that is believable, then it helps your readers stay immersed in the story. Do they feel regret at what they did in the fight? Um, did they stoop lower than they thought they would? Or in the heat of that moment, did they react in a way that they didn't think that they would, despite all their training? Do they regret? Do they have guilt? And despite how battles are viewed in film, in movies, TV show, throwing out a random fight in any of those stories is fine because it's visual and it's a whole different medium. But when you're writing books, you can't just throw in a fight at random because it can hinder your story. Um, it can be jarring and feel like um, it takes the reader out of the story and makes them question like why. Why are they doing this? Why is this fight scene here? Is it just for fluff just to make the story longer, make the book bigger? But when you write relatable characters, they tend to be a lot more lovable, memorable, and they hold the attention of the readers. And a lot of that groundwork needs to be laid before action scenes. Not always. A lot of books start out in action scenes. My books always start out thrown into the fire. A big, I'm not a big writer who will, hold your hand and show you how this world works for the first 10 chapters. My first 1 to 2 chapters is in battle. And your readers are not connected to your character at that point. So you have to do things in the fight and showcase their characterisms, their mannerisms, some of their training, their resolve. You have to show that in the fight. Um, and then, of course, you have your POVs and you couple that with the character's importance to the story, and you pull somebody into the story through action. So violence is a large selling point, but in writing, it still needs to make sense for the story. So you have to ask the key questions. One, why are your characters fighting? And sometimes you can just have a battle and not answer that right away. But if you're putting a fight halfway into the story, your readers should know why they're fighting generally before they're fighting. And an important question to ask when you're planning these combat sequences is why the characters engaged, if it's physically or verbally. Um, while there are people who attack others for no reason, there's, you know, people on short tempers or whatever, you still got to make the fight believable. And even if your characters are fighting on a whim, what is driving them? Why? What are their motives behind it all? Um, and if there's an overarching conflict in the story, a larger part of the story that you're trying to convey, then you have to ask yourself why. Why are you putting it in there? Why are your readers? Um, why should they be engaged in this specific point in the story? Why does each battle, each maneuver, how does it propel the story and the characters and the arcs and the plot? How does it all project it towards the end goal of your story, towards the third act, the final act of the story? And then you want to ask, what are some risks the characters lose? Something a lot of people don't realize is every single fight, you're at risk of something. And it's not really limited to the antagonist. It's not just, what is the bad guy gonna gain or lose? What is the good guy gonna win or lose? What are the risks though if they win or lose? Is it always gonna be what they want, what they desire? And a lot of times you can take these action scenes that are doing this, and you have these risks that are taken, and sometimes it can project the story in a different way, in a whole different light, in a different path. And at that point, you know that when you erase the fight you've gone before and after, that that fight was very important. So your readers they're not going to skip that, and if they do, they're not going to have to go back. But you got to draw them in first. So adding risk and reward to every fight makes them relatable, more believable, and it directly adds to the story's progression. So adding a lot of the elements into action and combat scenes can help a compelling narrative that doesn't really feel out of place. And you can build scenes that don't feel apart from the story, but a part of the story, if that makes sense. Step two, who is the target? Many characteristics, personalities can be revealed through action scenes, through combat. And your characters and their characteristics can be built or expanded on through a fight, or changed through a fight. Uh, as an average human, not everybody knows what they're going to do in the face of conflict. Um, Mike Tyson says something along the lines of everybody has a plan until they're punched in the mouth. And that goes well for writing and writing characters as well. And not every one of your characters is or should be highly trained. Not every one of them are going to be, veterans or somebody that's just spent the last 6 months in training. Sometimes a lot of your characters that are going on these hero's journeys, they were just regular people. And maybe they're fighting along the way and learning how to fight along the way, but they're not there at the beginning. So not every story fits to have, these assassins, cage fighters, and things like that all grouped together. Having a wide variety of assets and abilities, it really drives things forward. So you think about motives. Why does the character fight? And furthermore, why do they make the choices in that fight? Did they engage the battle first, or are they protecting someone or something, or are they fighting for something? Are they trying to move the location of the fight? Maybe they're trying to distract. You think about motives, why the characters are doing what they're doing. You think about personalities. So why does the fight, or what does the fight reveal or reassure about the character's personality? character somebody who you thought was a really noble and just an honorable person, but then mid-fight, they pick up sand and throw it in the other character's face? Did they cheat, or did they freeze in the face of combat? Um, I saw it a few times in the military where the people you thought these these gym rats and these people that were great during training, they came to combat and they would freeze, and then the people you thought were maybe not that great, they're the ones that step up. They're the ones that have the internal fortitude to step up and go to the fight, even if they might not be the best fighter. But it shows a lot about heart and character. Um, or in the fight itself, do they hold back? Do they stop themselves from taking that final step and killing their character? Or if they did hold back, then why? And then are they just simply aiming to defend? If they're just defending themselves and trying to get away from the fight itself, that's a whole different way of showcasing your character. And then you can ask yourself, do they just try to resolve the fight quickly, end it quick? And a lot of the big battle fight scenes of these massive battles of armies, your fights are going to move a lot faster. And when you're standing before 1,000 soldiers and you're a part of 1,000 soldiers, the ones that you're cutting down, those fights, those strikes, they're all meant to be ended quickly. You're not going to stand there and go toe to toe with one person and have this long drawn out fight, because you have 1,000 people doing that, and it doesn't work that way. It doesn't feel real. So then you ask yourself, well, how skilled is my character in a fight? Are they just somebody who found a sword and picked it up and decided to swing it? And if they did, then throughout your fight, you showcase that your character doesn't know proper stances, doesn't know how to properly hold it, doesn't know the feeling when a sword strikes his sword and it jars his whole hand. Or is it a character who picked up a gun and tried to defend themselves? He doesn't quite know how to shoot it. And you can showcase little things like they didn't know the safety was on. They don't know how to properly aim the weapon. So what does the fight reveal or reinforce by your character? Then we move into goals. So what does your character hope to gain or lose in any combat scene? And it's not always something that is planned or prepared. It's just when it happens, what is going through your character's mind. A lot of times in real fights, there are not words that are spoken. They're not even coherent strands of thought that are completely completed sentences. They are feelings. They are simple goals, hopes. And what do they hope to gain, or what do they stand to lose in a fight scene? What are they working towards? And maybe your characters are mandated to fight. Maybe they're soldiers, or um, they're following orders. An internal thought during that can reveal a lot. So maybe they don't agree with their orders, but they do it anyway, showcasing that they are loyal, that they are obedient. Well, maybe they break away from that. So is your character mandated to fight? Um, maybe they're just aiming to stall a villain. You can set up entire ruses where your heroes are just trying to stall a villain, trying to buy some time. Or is your character being pushed against the motives of somebody else? Then we talk about skill. So you should showcase the skill level of your character's fighting, usually beforehand. Um, but if not, sometimes you can use it as a surprise. You have a character, for example, in my Elmerian Chronicles, I have a character, Nathalios, and he's first introduced as a bard and a tracker. And um, he's kind of seen as this mouthy, younger guy in his early 20s, and nobody really thinks much of him until one of the battles comes up, and they see him moving with precision and everything that shows that before he met all the other characters, he trained for a long time, over half of his life in combat, and he was trained by people who know martial arts much better than they train the average soldier. So it's like this big shock that he's coming in and now he's slicing everybody up and moving with proficient speed across the battlefield. And then that changes the whole outlook of the other characters on him. It changes the reader's outlook on him. And that's a lot of questions. So, did you reveal anything in your training prior to the fight scene or during the fight scene? And then you can talk about before or after. You can go in and talk about how much training you've had. If they're a veteran or martial artist, you can explain it, but you don't always have to. You can keep that air of mysteriousness about them. Um, but you can reveal if your character is violent and non-violent. Sometimes characters or people in general, they keep that wolf at bay. They keep that monster inside them hidden for a long time, and then they snap, and then they slaughter a whole bunch of people. And sometimes it doesn't just go away. That feeling, that adrenaline, that rage doesn't just go away. So for the next however many chapters or the rest of the story, maybe that character is full of regret and rage, and um, it changes and reveals a lot about the character. All right, so we're going to move into step 3. So step 3 is setting the stage. These are things you can think about usually before you get into fight scene. Now, I say that, but I wrote my first book, I pantsed my way through it. And like I said, for me, to write action scenes is easy. I can see them in my mind, and I can jot them down. The choreography just instantly comes to me, but they don't for everybody. So this is where you come to set the stage. So like while lights and explosions, or weapons and technology, they appear really fascinating in movies, you get to see so many little details of the weapons, the armor, the settings, vehicles, everything. But if you're reading it, it can seem really over the top, or like you're hand holding, and you don't want to do that. So maybe you have a scene that's just quick, or if you have a battle that is really, really long. But either way, you don't want it to be boring. You don't want to, bog your characters down with massive amounts of descriptions and everything like that. So you build your setting through the fight, but you kind of do this beforehand when you're setting it up. So we've established how the characters in the fight scenes push the story forward, and when we begin to plan out the actual action itself, um, you think about how your combatants are matched. Is one character or one army stronger than the other? And if they are, how is your characters, how are your protagonists going to overcome that? Is one faster than the other, stronger, have a more technological advantage? Are they outnumbered? And if it's fantasy, maybe there's fatigue from magic or threat from magic. So we look at the traits of characters. So before you actually get into the fight itself, you set the stage for it and you think about the traits of your characters. All these things we've talked about. Their experience in fighting, their training, their characteristics. What do they bring to the table? And then so you've got the whole side of the character set up, and now you're looking at setting. So look at the terrain. Are they fighting in an open field in between two castles, or are they running through the woods? is a car chase and they're blazing up and down streets or in a bar, something like that. So you think about the entire setting and you think about how your characters react and use things of their settings. So a typical street fight or like in a parking lot, you come across really bland fighting. It's because characters really only have each other to interact with that way. So you can spice up your action scenes by changing up the terrain, drawing it to somewhere else. Maybe you have an idea for a fight scene, but you wait until the characters are at a certain place to really put it in there. So you think about characters fighting, geography can play a major part. And not every fight's going to be in an alley or bar. So you think about the ground. A lot of people don't think about the ground when it comes to fighting. But if your characters are fighting on a hill, so many things about that can change that outcome. You know, the Star Wars, scene, I have the high ground. Well, it's legit. It's an actual tactic. If you think about the geography, are they standing on a hill fighting? Or are they in woods and they can't really swing a sword? Or are they running through a city and they can't just send bullets across the city because then now you got collateral damage. So you think about the location. What's the climate like there? Are they going to be sweating? Is it going to be really hot and muggy? If it is, they're not going to be able to grab a hold of each other, or they're going to be getting sweat in their eyes. And these little details that come quick, and it takes your reader and pulls them deep into the fight scene itself. You think about, are your characters fighting on a mountain? And if they are, then you got to spin because they're going to be getting winded quicker. And maybe that's a surprise to your character who's been training for the last 6 months down on the lower grounds. Is it cold? If they're fighting in the winter, I don't know. You spend a lot of time out in the winter, but even if you are warm from the battle itself, getting warmed up, if your characters are traveling for a long time through that, their hands are going to be cold. Their grip is going to be sloppy on their swords. Uh, their knuckles are going to crack and hurt more when they make those strikes. Your joints and everything is going to be tight. You're not going to be able to move as well. And that's in normal clothing. If they're wearing armor, chainmail or something like that, in the winter, it's going to really change the outcome of a fight itself. And as far as location goes, there are things that can be used. Maybe a character picks up a stick or a pool stick from in a bar or a bottle or a trash can in an alley. You know, uh, or maybe they're in the desert. And they'll throw that sand in the other character's eye. Or a rainforest, and they can grab vines and choke each other. Office settings, maybe they use computers and keyboards to smash each other. Or would your character even go for something like that? That can reveal a lot about your character as well. So utilizing the space and the items can be vital to survival in real life and for the characters. So the terrain itself can play a huge part. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a car chase on the highway or a barroom fight. The grounds upon which the characters stand and move around can be instrumental in spicing up a scene itself. And perhaps the character isn't well trained in fighting. Maybe they pick up that coffee mug in the cubicle and smash it because it's a panic move. Or maybe it's not even an action genre of a book. You have a romance thriller and something happens. So your characters are not trained, but they react. It's a survival instinct. And if they did, you can take those little things and those little choices, like smashing a coffee mug on their face, and maybe it cut their hand. And that can take the story into different arcs. In the heat of the moment, they're going to reach for that stool in the bar, or they're going to brawl it out in a little Western style and, show how tough they are, how trained they are, or experienced. And if it's on uneven ground, even the highest trained combatants, they can slip or fall, and you trip on rocks or roots. Or if you're in a bar, maybe, a couple beers got spilled over on the floor, and Now the floor is slick, and you can introduce chaos into an action scene that maybe your character thought was going to be a smooth fight, and it can trigger, uh, the reader's heart racing. It's that setting them up on the edge of their seat in that suspense. And then not knowing the outcome of the fight, do that. It'll keep your readers engaged. That's not going to be predictable. You can add things like terrain or location and break up monotony or repetitiveness of action scenes. That's another big thing. You don't want all the action scenes to be the same style, the same layout. You don't want them to all be the same terrain, the same amount of people fighting each other, same magic, everything. So we move into sentence structures. Now I should probably have this one a little bit lower, but I want to go ahead and put this in there because after you set the stage, it's actually time to start writing the story itself. So a lot of authors will say to use short sentences in action scenes, but if you really want to maximize like painting a picture, I always recommend breaking sentence structures up. So take some short sentences, some long sentences, put them together. Short bursts of internal thought, but you can uh, you can set a pace with those short sentences. So if you say like, Wesley swung his fist forward and slammed the burglar in his nose. He snarled as he shook his fist. Ouch, he said, feeling the throbbing in his knuckles. Well, you've painted a little picture, but if you take those sentences and make them short, Wesley punched the burglar. He shook his fist. He snarled. Ouch. It's short. It's choppy, and it it's almost like jumping through, like fast forwarding through all those little details that you normally get in your characters and your story building. When you're doing that, it's rushing the story forward. This little burst of fast forward. Um, and we get the same content of what's happened, but the pacing is different. And the pacing you can manipulate in sentence strength, a sentence length and structure. So the longer sentences will put the picture together and feel like it's slowing the pace. And you can do that on purpose, especially when it comes to internal thought, or when your characters break apart and have conversations. So if you look at blending shorter sentences with longer sentences, you say, Wesley swung his fist forward, slammed the burglar in his nose. Snarling, he shook his fist. Ouch, he said, and he felt throbbing in his knuckles. The burglar tripped over the curb, crashing into a trash can. Pungent trash spilled on the ground. So you do the mixing of longer and shorter sentences, and we get a sense of faster pacing, and yet allowing you to paint the scene a little bit better. So I would say when people write action scenes in just these short sentences, it can certainly increase the pace and get the heart pumping. But at the same time, you're missing a lot of things that really instill a reality, a sense of reality, and keep your reader immersed in the setting itself. You want your characters in an action scene to feel like they're there. You want them to, to follow the characters through and through. And when they're all short sentences, you seem like you're missing something, or it'll start to feel rushed. But at the same time, you don't want to do the longer sentences all the way through because now your fight feels like it's just dragging out, and a lot of fights are over in under a minute. They're over in seconds. A lot of them are. So you got to think about what kind of pace you're trying to set. And verbs can change your pacing. So what senses can be used in each movement? Another method of making a fight scene feel more visceral is paying attention to the sense of feeling. Of course, a lot of fight scenes will describe pain, but you think about all the other senses that are going on. Your heart's racing, stomach twisting and feeling nauseous from nerves. Your lungs are burning, your limbs are burning, and they're slippery from sweat. You think about the temperature outside, how bright it is, how dark it is. uh, the taste of blood in your mouth, getting punched, sweat in the eyes, the roughness of clothing and armor and movement, the weight of people as you're trying to move through a fight. Adding a lot of senses like that, it'll help break up the sentence structure as well. You can go back and forth between these, just the choreography of the fight itself and the description of the scene. So then we get into step 5. Now this is where a lot of authors who don't have experience in combat or training, is where I think we get a lot of problems. Not really problems, but I think it's where a lot of characters, a lot of writers will dread writing these scenes because they don't know how to go about it. They don't know, technical names. They don't know movements. They can't think about choreography in their mind. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of traditional martial arts styles, and then on top of that, you got mixed martial arts, tactical combat training programs, military. Some martial arts are designed for just defense, and some are designed to cause pain in the fight very fast. And that can say a lot about the character, about what style of fighting they do and or train. So some characters might be reluctant, or they might be reluctant to throw a punch at all. Like I talked about earlier, some people they freeze up in the face of combat, and maybe they're reluctant to throw that punch, or they're just running away, and maybe another character is just going to grab them, and take them straight to the ground instead of fights and everything like that. It's going to be really brutal and just snarling and animalistic. And while in fiction anything is technically possible, you only suspend belief so much. So when you're writing a story about like a magical kingdom set in a Renaissance type era, medieval, it wouldn't make sense for your character to be really proficient in, say, jujitsu or something like that, unless you've built that rule, that law, that setting beforehand. You don't want to start your story with um, describing a setting that feels medieval, and then have them go into these really proficient Kyokushin karate, style of fighting, unless you're going to explain that in the story, because you don't want your character asking like why. You don't want to pull them out and have them asking, well, how is that? You know. So of course, if you're writing a fictional story, you can create your own style of fighting, which is what a lot of people do. And you can blend it. You can give it even a name, the training of it, whatever. Maybe your character has just fought a lot throughout their life, and they really hone their skills of how to do it their own way. And it's not even an actual style; it's just their way of fighting. In my Elden Chronicles, my main character Arik, in the beginning of the series, he is he's a sword. He dual wields swords, and he does it with proficiency because the Sentinels that he's part of, they're trained for a little bit, but he's been in combat for so long that his way of fighting is finding opportunities in the middle of the fight and then just taking them versus somebody that's going to sit there and try to set up a fight. So instead of pulling these fancy stances and everything, he'll swing a sword, and if he sees your foot slide forward, he'll stab it. And then as you double forward from that impact, from that pain, that injury, wherever his sword's going to go, it's going to go. And he's done it so long, for half of his life, that his strikes are really efficient, um, even if they're not trying to set up the fight itself. He's not trying to manipulate how the other person's going to move. He was more of a reactive fighter in the beginning. Now, that's the beginning of the story, which takes place 16 years after he's been a Sentinel. But throughout the series, he really truly learns how to fight with his sword better. He actually gets training throughout the series, and coupling that with how he used to be makes him a lot better sword fighter. So you have some martial arts that have been around for millennia, and then you have people who just strike where they can strike. Um, Not all your characters have to be proficient in any kind of training or experience. So maybe they're just self-taught fighters like that. And if it's set on Earth, then you got to pay attention to eras. If you're setting it on our Earth, if it's not high fantasy or different world, then try to pay attention to like the eras of different martial arts and fighting shifting around the world. Because think about like the United States. The United States didn't really have martial arts until about World War II, when Herb Trius was the no Robert Trius was a Navy SEAL, or he was Navy. When the Navy trains, they train in boxing. And in World War II, he was in Japan, and he went over to Okinawa, and he challenged um, Yukishin Funakoshi. If I got that name right. And he was a champion boxer. And that Kyokushin karate master told him, if you can land a punch on me, I will train you in my style. And of course, Robert Trius thought it was a joke, but they had a little sparring match, and he didn't land one punch. And this is a Golden Glove boxer. And after that, he devoted his life to training in karate, and then he brought it to the United States. And that's kind of where we started martial arts in the United States. Before that, it was just brawling and boxing. It wasn't really martial arts. And he brought it over here and started doing schools. And you go up through the 70s when the Chinese styles were coming in, and you had problems with the Chinese not wanting Kung Fu to be brought over to the United States. So we had a shift with Bruce Lee and creating Wing Chun. And so there's a whole era that is morphed of martial arts. Now we have UFC. But while combat has always been a massive part of life and sports and things like that, you think about the different eras of martial arts or styles of fighting or weapons and technology. We didn't always have guns, and before that, we didn't always have crossbows. But if you look into the history of it, firearms goes back to about the year 1000. You talk about the fire lance that comes from the Chinese. But it's important to pay attention to the history of your world, whether it's Earth or your own world. So, in the setting, you create a story, you create a setting. Time and place can play a large part in the styles that you choose. You write a story that's set in history, pay attention to the location, the era. If you're setting is set in like Germany in the 40s, you're most likely going to want a style of boxing or firearm utilization. But if it's set in 1800s Asia, you're going to have more of these martial arts like Kung Fu. And Kung Fu originated around like 221 BC, or perhaps it's just wrestling and fencing. And does that say something about the kingdoms and the nobilities of your story? So you have your different styles and how they play into combat itself. Are they a linear, a really straightforward style of fighting, or are they more of a circular, flowing style of martial arts? So you can look into martial arts themselves, or you can create your own. So the step 6. I'm trying to speed this up here. Step 6 is switch your stance. So you think about some of your favorite action scenes, and what have you noticed about a shift in the panning of the camera on TV and in movies? And that's usually because you want to see the full scope of the action. So maybe your story is written in like a first-person view, or it's a closed narrative, but you can still write a really palpable action scene. And some authors will switch from first to third or omniscient, and it's to get more context of the story of the fight itself. Because the story is packed with full of action, then you might want to consider writing in third person limited anyway. And that follows one or two characters. In third person omniscient point of view, though, the scope is taken from afar. It's like the narrator is seeing the entire thing laid out, and you can do these styles of like zooming out, especially going from third to omniscient. In first person, the action focuses a lot more on emotions and the blow by blow seeing the character itself. But In the third person, you get the scope of the fight, and that can really change, how the reader gets to absorb this action. Here, watch like two people engaged in a fight. You usually focus on watching one side. If you're rooting for like a sports team, you tend to lose a bit of what the other team is doing or the other person is doing, and you're waiting for these reactions. And then that's third person limited. But if you're watching a football game with no preference for a team, you're watching two people fight on a video, you don't know which one, you don't know who they are. Then you can kind of focus on watching both of them, and that's more omniscient. So you can switch the stance, the POV, and that can change a little bit too. So step 7 is paint with a wide brush. While the point of view is diving into descriptions and details, and POV is meant to focus on the action, you can't forget to set the stage, and there are a lot of things to be included and considered. So when I say paint with a wide brush, you want to create this beautifully crafted picture of the scene. And death and combat is not beautiful, but there's a way of doing it to make it really visceral and drawing characters in. So you think about all those things: the terrain, the temperature, the visibility, the training that the characters have, elevation, and you do this. You paint this whole scene out wide, and you kind of come back in and out of this wide painting of the setting down to the characters, their internal thought, their little jibes when they're talking to each other. Some of the best fights and action scenes, you play around with environments and then move locations either before the fight scene started or finished. If you take an action scene and it's really moving, like across the location, that's going to be drawing people in. Step 8: a lot of people don't use enough senses when you're writing a character, when you're writing a fight scene. You want your fight scene to feel visceral and real, so use a lot more of your senses. A lot of people will talk about the sight. They'll talk about what they can see during the fight, or they talk about the pain. But there are a lot of things in sight that you don't really think about until you're in that fight scene. If you're really drawn down to the characters, they're going to miss a lot of things in sight because everything's a blur. Your focus is locked on the other character. And in touch, it's not always just about pain. You get nausea, you feel a shift in the temperature, the wind, your hands are clammy, your weapons are fumbling in your hands, the textures of armor and clothing and things like that. But then you think about other senses. Hearing. Sense of hearing can be important in action scenes, particularly those, to build suspense going into it. And in some cases, it's a lack of sound that's unnerving. And a lot of those times are the best times to dial in descriptions of sound, keeping in mind little movements, steps, the sounds of, when you punch somebody, the grunts they make. And you think about smell. And the sense of smell is often missed in fights, but aromas, they're not often thought about. But you think about like sweat and fumes and lingering shampoo or gunpowder, trash on the street, alcohol, smoke. A lot of the things that can pull your characters out of a fight scene or maybe distract them. And then another sense that is usually underutilized is the sense of taste. Your characters are more likely either going to be keeping their lips sealed during the action scene, or maybe they're breathing heavily through their wide open mouth. But you talk about the taste of blood in your mouth or sweat, and is it causing a character to gag? And so you add a lot of descriptive text of senses, and you don't want to over flood it, of course, but all these senses can be thought about. It's important to pick and choose how descriptive you write them. You want to add words that are visceral and exact. You don't want to keep the focus on the action and the pace. So I'm going to skip down here to step 10. Step 10 is injuries. Something that's vitally important to making your action and combat is adding injuries. When characters get hurt, especially extremely hurt, there's a sense of relatability because a lot of people a lot of your readers are going to have known pain throughout their life. They're going to know what it feels like to get cut or pull back muscle or, smack their head off something hard. So when they get hurt, you want to add those injuries to build emotion and immersion and risk to the story. So you think about what kind of injuries should you add, and that depends on the fight itself. How grievous should the wound be, and that depends on uh, what they're using and everything. But you should do plenty of research into like stab wounds, bullet wounds, burns, things like that. If you want to make them really feel real, it'll make them stand out. As things that'll make them stand out is like timing and descriptions, effects, how they shift the story. If your character's injuries going to last them, the rest of the book, or is it something that they're going to heal up from, fast, either through magic or whatever. But your fights should feel like a dance back and forth between characters. There should be moments of these in and out between both sides. And a lot of writers fail to set that reality into play when it comes to injuries. Um, you don't want to confuse your readers and things like that, but if your character takes a sword through his shoulder that is his sword arm, that completely changes the entire fight. So whether you're writing fantasy or thriller, and like that, almost all injuries you can research, and they can be explained in great detail from medical records to science and videos and like that. Just I always tell people, make sure you're actually looking at what an injury does to the body, and then you want to have that continuity throughout the story. You can't just gloss over, somebody that got their hand, an arrow through their hand, and the next chapter they're wielding their sword again. That's not how it goes. And that goes back to step one of the greats in the fight, what changed before and after. Depending on a lot of genres, a lot of tropes that play in the stories. In fantasy, there's often spells and potions that can heal the character, and obviously those are, fantasy. But if your character's got the ribs broken in chapter 3, and it's a more realistic setting, set in all world or thriller, they're going to be in quite a bit of pain, and for a long while. Their breathing's going to become difficult, reaching over their head, all their twisting and movements is going to be slower and more careful. So they're not just going to be diving right back into a fight 2 chapters later with a broken rib, unless they've been healed by something miraculous. And then maybe your characters will exploit injuries. Maybe they punch them in the eye and they see the eye swelling up and they start targeting that. And that can change how your character fights, revealing a lot about your characters. Are they somebody that's going to take that and think it's, that's a cheap way of doing it? Or is that, is that going to be the target? And we're just going to get the fight over with. Step 11, let's dance. So a lot of authors assume that they have to have some semblance of experience in order to write a detailed fight, but it's not really the case. As the example of this is found in a lot of fantasy or sci-fi rather. Some of the most entertaining fights are really unrealistic and couldn't possibly be experienced by any author, especially in terms of magic or super strength and things like that. The choreography of an action scene is not limited to fighting. You can have car chases and stunts or theft, military tactics. And there's a lot that can fall under the category of choreography. That's not just the fight itself. But a large number of authors, they want to know how to write their characters as a trained writer, even though they've never trained themselves. And something you can do really easily is think about movement. Just think about body movement. It might seem logical to just dive right into researching techniques and names of martial arts and styles and everything like that, but you don't really need to add them. You can take your simple movements of everyday life. So you got hit in the rib with something, and think about how your body moves, and then what is the rest of your body? What does that open up for attack? And it's little things like that that can set a whole fight up, even if you've never had training before. Just think about body movements and your natural instincts to block yourself when something's falling off the shelf. You're lifting up your arms and everything like that. So the reader has to digest the the words and mentally put together the picture you're trying to paint, and doing that, it can really help a fight scene feel like the characters know what they're doing, even if you don't. If you don't want to do blow by blow scenes, he punched him, he fell backwards, he came back forward. That feels stagnant, and it slows the pace down. Um, but you also want to refrain from like these long-winded descriptions of how much pain and the taste of blood and everything like that. You want to break it up. And um, so for the last little point here is the final showdown. So how has the battle kit changed the character, or the reveal about the character? You think about, did the character get injured? Did they unlock a part of the instinct or the power? Did they do something they regret? Did they learn something about their choice making? And maybe they'll lean into that and do it again. Did they actually reveal anything about their moral compass? Did they meet their goals? And if they didn't, then what does that do for their arc going forward, their plot going forward? Did it reveal a superior style of fighting and force the character to take a step back and realize they need more training? A lot of those characters can be thought, or the questions can be thought about, after the fight of your character itself, and keeping hindsight of a fight. Or your character thinks, "Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that." Then you know that you've set up a fight scene that is memorable, that is important to the story, and shouldn't be skipped. And usually after your first one, your characters or your readers are not going to skip the fight scenes anymore. So I tried to blaze through those last steps there, but yeah, in the end, you don't need all this high training to be able to write fight scenes. You just need to really think about the fight, and um, when it comes to descriptions, you don't want it to be bland, but you don't want to be over the top. So there's this semblance of balance between them. I think that's all I got for that one.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much. That was really informative and all that. I really enjoyed that. Does anybody have any questions for Corey before we move on to the next panel? No? Well, you can always, if you have any questions that you have later, you can always drop it in his channel in the workshop thing. But I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot myself too, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right, now I end this recording.